AITA for leaving an iPad at a B&B, then threatening with the police when the owners ignored me? I've never been one to forget my stuff. I'm the kind of person who double-checks every little thing before leaving a place: hotel rooms, coffee shops, my car, because I hate losing things. I always do one last scan of the room, checking for phone chargers, jackets, keys, the whole routine. But I guess we all have our moments. Because somehow, I managed to leave my iPad at this B&B a while back. And the whole thing became way more complicated than I could have ever expected. So, here's what happened. I'd been staying at this little B&B on a road trip. Just me and my motorbike, traveling across a few states to clear my head. The B&B was nice, too, one of those places with a lot of character. Friendly owners, homemade breakfast in the morning. It felt like the kind of place where you could just relax. No worries. I packed up my things, grabbed my bags, and left early in the morning, eager to get back on the road. I thought I had everything, but obviously, I didn't. I didn't realize I'd left my iPad until hours later, when I stopped for lunch a few hundred miles down the road. I was looking for it in my backpack to check a map and, nothing. Panic started creeping in. I'd left it sitting right on the nightstand. I felt like an idiot. Honestly, my iPad isn't just some gadget I use for fun, it's how I do half my work when I'm on the road. It has all my documents, my emails, even some personal stuff I'd rather not lose. It's a bit of a lifeline for me. But, luckily, as I sat there kicking myself, I got a notification on my phone. I'd missed a call from the B&B number, and they'd left a message letting me know they'd found it. Relief flooded over me. They had it. They knew it was mine. Everything should be easy from here. I called them back right away, but it went to voicemail. No big deal, right? They were probably busy with other guests. And then I noticed they'd also sent an email saying they'd keep it safe and to let them know how I wanted it returned. I thought I'd just call them back the next morning, give them my address, offer to pay for postage, and be done with it. I figured this would be a quick fix, a small bump in the road. The next morning, I called them back right after breakfast, thinking I'd finally wrap this up and get my iPad back. But, again, straight to voicemail. I left a message, giving my address and letting them know I'd be happy to cover any postage costs. Then I waited, figuring they'd get back to me that day. Except they didn't. I thought maybe they were busy, or my voicemail got buried under other messages. These things happen, right? So, I sent them an email later that day to follow up. Just a simple, polite note. Hey, just wanted to check if you got my voicemail. Here's my address and number again in case you need it. Thanks for keeping my iPad safe. Nothing. I mean, radio silence. A couple of days passed, and by now I was starting to get frustrated. I tried their phone number again, hoping I'd catch them at a quieter time, but still no answer. I tried calling early in the morning, then in the afternoon, then later in the evening, just in case I was missing them somehow. Every call went to voicemail, so I left a few more messages, each one polite but increasingly desperate. I thought, alright, maybe they're not checking their phone much, so let me try a different route. I sent another email, this time through the Booking.com platform, figuring it would show up on their end with a little more urgency. I explained the situation, confirmed my address again, and asked if they needed anything else from me to get it shipped. I even threw in that I was happy to reimburse for gas or any costs they might have for the trip to the post office, just to make it as convenient as possible for them. Another few days passed, and still, nothing, not a word. At this point, I started to feel a weird mix of frustration and self-doubt. I wondered if I'd done something wrong, if I'd somehow missed an important step. I even double-checked to make sure I hadn't given them the wrong number or missed their reply. But nope, I'd done everything right on my end. They had my email, my number, my address, they had everything they needed. Weeks were starting to slip by, and I was no closer to getting my iPad. I tried their contact form on their website, thinking maybe emails were going to spam or something. I kept the tone light, casual, almost like I was trying not to sound too invested. But at this point, I was pretty frustrated. My messages were starting to sound a bit repetitive. Sure, but what else could I do? It was just silence on their end, like they decided to ignore me completely. Every time I reached out, I had to psych myself up a little, telling myself that they probably just hadn't had a chance to respond, that they'd get around to it any day now. But with each unanswered message, the frustration grew. It was like this tiny thing, just getting back a piece of equipment I'd left behind, had somehow turned into a full-blown test of my patience. I could feel the self-doubt creeping in. I started wondering if I was overreacting, if maybe I was being too persistent, or if this was somehow my fault for leaving it behind in the first place. I mean, yeah, it was my responsibility, but they'd reached out to me to let me know they had it. Why not follow through? After weeks of this endless waiting, I was reaching my limit. My iPad was just sitting there, and no matter what I tried, I couldn't get a response from the B&B owner. I knew they still had it, My Find My app even showed that it hadn't moved from their location, which made this whole thing feel even more frustrating. I tried telling myself that people get busy, but come on, at some point you take 5 minutes to help someone out, especially when you know they're trying to get back something as important as a work device. So, I finally called my travel insurance provider, hoping they could suggest something. I was willing to try anything at this point, just to get this resolved. After hearing the whole story, they told me that if I knew for a fact where my iPad was and the property owner wouldn't respond, I should consider filing a report with the police, listing it as missing property, or even theft by possession, since they were knowingly holding onto it without my permission. I was hesitant. I really didn't want to go down that road. The last thing I wanted was to drag the police into what I hoped was just a case of an overly busy business owner who'd forgotten to drop my package at the post office. I tried to reason with myself, thinking maybe they were just overwhelmed. But on the other hand, it had been weeks without a single acknowledgement. I'd done everything I could think of to make this easy for them, and they were still ghosting me. At some point, I had to draw a line, didn't I? I decided to go with a softer approach first. Instead of filing a full-on police report, I wrote an email to the local police station, explaining the situation and asking if they might be able to help me reach the owner. I kept it as polite and calm as possible. I even added a note saying that I didn't want anyone to get into trouble, that I was sure it was just a misunderstanding, but that I really needed my device back and didn't know how else to get in contact with them. Then, just when I was beginning to wonder if even the police wouldn't respond, I got an unexpected reply. Turns out, the B&B owner actually worked for the local police department. I was stunned. Here I was, politely asking the police to help me reach out to one of their own. And it felt like I just kicked a hornet's nest. Not long after that email went out, I received a message from the B&B owner, and let's just say, they were far from happy. The tone of the message was curt. To put it mildly, they said they'd been very busy with their job, their family, and running the B&B, and that it was disappointing to see I'd contacted the police. They implied that I was overreacting, that I needed to be more understanding because it's human nature to get sidetracked. Just like it's human nature to forget things in a rush. I get it, everyone's busy. We all make mistakes, but something about the way they said it made me feel like the bad guy for simply wanting my property back. It was almost like they were blaming me for leaving the iPad in the first place. Like this was all somehow my fault. I felt a strange mix of anger and guilt. I didn't want to get them in trouble, but at the same time, I felt they were completely brushing off my efforts to handle this kindly. I tried to stay calm, telling myself that at least they'd finally acknowledge the situation. Surely, this meant they'd ship it soon, right? I was ready to forgive and forget if they'd just send the iPad and be done with it. But I had no idea that the silence was about to start all over again. After the owner's message, I thought this whole ordeal might finally wrap up. I mean, they had to realize I wasn't giving up on this, right? Surely they'd just send the iPad now, especially after I'd involved the police. Even if that move had annoyed them. I waited a day, then two, nothing, not a single follow-up, no tracking information, no notification that the package was en route. It felt surreal. I'd gone out of my way to be patient, to reach out politely through every channel I could think of, and still, silence. Part of me wondered if they were just dragging their feet to make a point, to punish me somehow for getting the authorities involved. And maybe I was reading too much into it. But that initial message from them had sounded so accusatory, like I was the one causing trouble just by trying to retrieve my own property. So, I started reaching out again. I called and left voicemails, explaining that I was just checking to see if they needed any more info to send the iPad. I even threw in a few polite notes, acknowledging that they were busy and thanking them in advance for their effort. But the days continued to pass without a word. My calls went straight to voicemail, and any emails I sent just sat there, unanswered. By this point, I was feeling totally helpless. I mean, what more could I do? I'd tried everything, booking.com messages, their own contact form, the police, yet here I was, still sitting in the dark, wondering if I'd ever see my iPad again. It felt ridiculous to keep calling, knowing they probably weren't going to pick up, but I didn't know what else to try. As the silence stretched on, I started questioning everything. Had I really done the right thing by involving the police? Should I have just let it go? But then I'd think about all the work documents, the files, the personal photos I'd saved on that device, and I'd get frustrated all over again. This wasn't just some random gadget I could replace. It was a tool I relied on, a link to my work and personal life, and losing it wasn't an option. I started thinking about what else I could say to get them to listen, to realize how much this was affecting me. So, I went back to my emails and sent one last message. I laid it all out, how long it had been, how many times I'd reached out, how much I appreciated their initial effort to contact me and how frustrated I was that we were still in the same place weeks later. I told them, respectfully but firmly, that if I didn't hear from them soon, I'd have no choice but to escalate this further. Honestly, I was half expecting them to ignore this message too, to keep stringing me along with silence. But apparently, that last email finally did the trick. The next day, I got a curt message from the owner saying they'd be heading to the post office later, and that the iPad would be sent. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of how long this had dragged on. Just a quick note to let me know they'd finally be sending it. It was a relief, sure, but there was no satisfaction in it. I felt drained, emotionally worn out from weeks of chasing something that should have been simple. And as I waited for the tracking info, I couldn't help but feel like they'd managed to make me feel like the bad guy the entire time. When I finally got that message from the B&B owner saying they'd be heading to the post office later, I felt nothing. Really, I should have felt relieved, like this whole mess was wrapping up. But honestly, the message was so curt, so dismissive, that it left me feeling drained instead. I hadn't asked for this back and forth or for all this stress over something so simple. And here they were, acting like they were doing me a favor, as if this whole thing wasn't their responsibility in the first place. But even after they'd said they were sending it, the paranoia kicked in. What if they didn't actually send it? What if it was another stalling tactic? I hadn't received any tracking info, no proof that they'd actually gone through with it. I waited a day, then another, checking my email obsessively for any sign that the iPad was actually on its way. After 2 days with no confirmation, I reached my breaking point. I'd been polite, I'd been patient, I'd even taken a softer approach when I first involved the police. But this was the final straw. So, I decided to send one more email, a firm, no-nonsense message where I laid out exactly how I felt and what I was prepared to do if they didn't follow through. I told them that I'd done everything to keep this civil, to respect their time and boundaries. But I was out of options. I let them know, clearly, that if I didn't see my iPad soon, I would escalate things to a formal police report. I sent the email and sat there, my hands shaking. I wasn't proud of taking such a hard line. But after weeks of being ignored, of being made to feel like an inconvenience, I didn't know what else I could do. I'd been pushed past the point of no return. If they couldn't respect a simple request, maybe the threat of police involvement would finally make them act responsibly. An hour later, like magic, I received a notification. My iPad had been shipped, and the tracking information was right there in my inbox. The change was so sudden, so immediate after my final email, that it felt almost absurd. All it had taken was one firm message, and suddenly they were at the post office, package in hand. Part of me wanted to feel victorious, like I'd finally gotten what I deserved. But mostly, I just felt exhausted. Here was something that could have been resolved in a day, something that didn't need to escalate to this level. Yet the owner had made it feel like a marathon. It was as if they'd been waiting for me to reach this point, waiting to see how far I'd go. And even though I'd gotten what I wanted, I was left feeling like I'd somehow lost. The tracking showed that the package was finally on its way, and I knew I'd get my iPad back in a few days. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this whole thing had left me questioning myself, second-guessing if I'd been unreasonable, if I'd been too harsh in the end. Because even though I'd finally taken a stand and gotten results, they'd managed to leave me feeling like the bad guy in the process. As I waited for my iPad to arrive, I found myself going over the whole ordeal in my head. Part of me kept thinking, you got it back, that's what matters. But another part of me couldn't shake the nagging doubt. Did I overreact? Had I taken things too far? I'd been made to feel like I'd crossed some invisible line, and it left a sour taste in my mouth. It's funny, no matter how many times I replayed it, I couldn't find a moment where I felt I'd truly gone wrong. But still, the guilt lingered. I mean, sure, I could have been more patient. But how much patience is reasonable when you're getting completely ignored? It wasn't just about the iPad itself, it was about being left in the dark. About having no control over something that felt important to me. I'd gone out of my way to make it easy for them, even offering to cover the cost of shipping and gas. And I'd still been ghosted. I kept reminding myself of all the polite emails and voicemails I'd left. How I'd given them chance after chance to make it right without involving anyone else. In the end, all I'd done was follow through on what the situation demanded. Right? But their tone, the way they'd brushed me off and made me feel like I was being unreasonable for simply wanting my property back. It made me question myself. Like I was the one in the wrong. They kept talking about how busy they were. How human it was to get sidetracked. As if my need to have my iPad returned was some kind of unrealistic burden. The irony of it all was that I could fully understand being busy, getting sidetracked, forgetting things. But at a certain point, don't you just follow through on your responsibilities? I think what bothered me most was how easily they'd shifted the blame onto me. It was almost as if by escalating things, I'd become the villain in their eyes, just for wanting a basic level of respect and accountability. And even though I'd only taken a stronger stance after weeks of being ignored, The way they'd reacted made it feel like I'd done something wrong. But then again, what other choice did I have? I wasn't asking for a favor, I was asking for my own property. The whole situation left me wondering about my own boundaries, about how much I'm willing to tolerate before standing up for myself. If I hadn't kept pushing, my iPad would probably still be sitting at that B&B, forgotten in the corner of some office. And if I'm being honest, the whole thing was exhausting. But it taught me something. I realized that, even though I'd felt like a bit of a jerk for going to the police, there are times when we have to take action to be taken seriously. So, was I in the wrong? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know if I'd handle it the exact same way if I could go back. But I also don't regret standing my ground. Sometimes, it's not about whether you're technically right or wrong, but about what you're willing to let slide. And in this case, I wasn't willing to let them keep my property out of convenience or because I was afraid of seeming pushy. The tracking update came in a few days later, and when the package finally arrived, I felt a strange mix of relief and hollowness. There was my iPad, safe and sound, but the whole experience had left me questioning myself in a way I hadn't expected. I got what I wanted, sure, but I wasn't left with the satisfaction I'd hoped for. When I finally held my iPad in my hands again, I thought I'd feel a huge wave of relief, maybe even a sense of victory. But the truth is, the whole thing had left me feeling more reflective than triumphant. Yes, I'd gotten it back, and yes, I'd had to push harder than I was comfortable with. But in the end, it wasn't really about the iPad. It was about figuring out where my line was, what I was willing to tolerate, and when it was okay to stand up for myself. For weeks, I'd been torn between guilt and frustration, questioning if I was the one who'd crossed a line. The B&B owner's reaction had done a number on me, making me feel like I was somehow wrong for being assertive, like I'd committed some sort of offense just by asking for my own property. And for a while, I believed it, wondered if maybe I had been out of line. But looking back, I knew I'd acted with as much patience and understanding as I could muster. I hadn't rushed to the police as a first step, I'd exhausted every other avenue. It was only when I'd been left with no other options that I decided to take a stand. I realized that this whole experience was about more than just an iPad. It was about respect, about valuing my own time, my own needs, even when someone else brushed them off. I'd bent over backward to keep things polite, to make it convenient for them. And in the end, what I'd asked for wasn't unreasonable. I was simply asking them to follow through, to show a basic level of accountability. The lesson was clear. It's okay to stand up for yourself, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when you're afraid of seeming pushy. I thought back to all the times I'd let things slide in other areas of my life, just to keep the peace. Times I'd gone silent when I should have spoken up. Times I'd felt dismissed but held back from saying anything. Maybe this experience, strange as it was, had pushed me to rethink what I was willing to accept. It had shown me that standing up for myself doesn't make me a bad guy. Even if others don't like it, I could see now that sometimes people will shift the blame, make you feel like you're the one in the wrong just because it's easier for them than admitting they've dropped the ball. Moving forward, I knew I'd be more comfortable asserting my boundaries. I'd be able to trust myself to speak up, not just because I deserved respect, but because I'd learned that if I didn't advocate for myself, no one else would. And even though this whole situation had been exhausting and frustrating, I felt like I gained a sense of clarity about how to handle these kinds of moments in the future. I could still be polite, still be understanding, but I didn't have to let myself be walked over just to keep someone else comfortable. The iPad was back where it belonged, but more importantly, so was a sense of self-respect that I'd been neglecting. This wasn't the kind of lesson I'd expected to learn from a forgotten piece of technology at a B&B. But life has a funny way of teaching us things in unexpected ways. And while I'm not sure I'd want to go through it all again, I'm grateful for the perspective it gave me. Sometimes, you just have to take a stand, even if it feels awkward. Even if you're worried about how others might see you. Because, in the end, there's nothing wrong with expecting a little respect. And from now on, I wouldn't hesitate to ask for it.
My wife had a mental breakdown when I left her alone with the kids. I'll be honest, nothing could have prepared me for the mix of emotions I've been feeling these last few days. Just 5 days ago, my wife gave birth to our second child, a beautiful baby girl, and since then, our world's been a whirlwind of diaper changes, sleepless nights, and moments that feel like both chaos and magic rolled into one. It's incredible, sure, but it's exhausting too. It's like we were barely figuring things out with our 3-year-old son. And now there's this whole new life, this tiny, delicate person we're responsible for. The minute we brought our daughter home, I could feel my whole mindset shift. I knew my wife would need time to recover, she just went through childbirth. After all, and that's no small feat. So, from day one, I made a decision. I was going to handle the night duties. All the late night feedings and the restless hours. I wanted to give her a full night's sleep, at least for these first few days, so she could focus on healing and feel like herself again. I'd deal with the exhaustion if it meant she'd get the rest she deserved. And it's funny, as tired as I am, I kind of don't mind it. Those late night hours, just me and my baby girl. It's special in its own way. There's a quietness to the house that feels comforting. Like we're the only two people in the world awake. It's just her tiny breaths, the weight of her in my arms, and the soft sounds of the house settling around us. Sometimes, when I'm up with her at 2 or 3 in the morning, I think about how these moments won't last forever. She's so small, so perfect, and even though I'm exhausted, there's something so pure about these one-on-one moments. And then, of course, there's my son. He came back home a couple of days after we brought the baby home. And he's been adjusting too. He's just 3, but he already senses that things are different. He's curious about his little sister, hovering nearby, watching everything with these big, serious eyes. I can tell he doesn't quite understand yet, but he's been surprisingly gentle. He pats her head with these tiny, clumsy hands, and my heart just about melts every time. Between the two kids, there's not a lot of downtime. I'm running on fumes most days, getting maybe 2 or 3 hours of sleep here and there, but I'm trying my best to keep things running smoothly. Every morning, I make sure my wife has time to herself, to get ready at her own pace. I get the kids dressed, fed, and keep them entertained, letting her have those precious moments of calm. She's doing amazing, but I know she's still recovering, and I want to do everything I can to make it easier for her. To be honest, I'm not even sure how I'm holding up. Every morning feels like a victory just to get us all up and moving. It's exhausting, yeah, but I keep telling myself it's temporary. Soon enough, our daughter will settle into a routine, and things will get a little easier. At least that's what I'm hoping. For now, I just keep moving, one day at a time, trying to be the dad and husband they need me to be. Every night, I'm on baby duty, and I'll be real with you, it's no joke. I didn't exactly go into this thinking it'd be easy, but there's something about the endless stretch of nights that catches you off guard. You think you know what tired is. Then you become a parent of a newborn and toddler, and tired becomes something else entirely. It's like living in this haze of half sleep, the kind that makes hours blur together until I can't tell if it's 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. Just that I'm up again, rocking her back and forth, back and forth. It's strange, though, because there's a part of me that doesn't mind it. Sure, I'd kill for a solid 8 hours of sleep, but those hours with my daughter, the quiet little routine we have, it's something I can't really describe. I'm holding her, looking down at this tiny, perfect face, and it's like the world just stops. She doesn't care about the mess, or the stress, or how I haven't slept properly in days. She's just there, needing me, and in those moments, I feel this pure kind of connection, like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, even if it's at the cost of sleep. My son, Radin, he's up early every morning, too, and that kid's got energy. He'll come bounding into the room with this huge grin, ready to start the day when I'm still blinking through the fog of the night shift. He's 3, which means he doesn't understand why I might be tired. To him, it's simple, Daddy's here. It's morning, and that means it's playtime. And I'll tell you what, I dig deep for that energy, trying my best to keep up with him, to make sure he feels the same love and attention he always has. Even if my tank's running on empty, I've never been the type to make a big deal about how much I'm doing. To be honest, I kind of enjoy it. There's something about taking on this role that feels right, like it's my way of showing up for my family, of taking care of the people I love. It's not just about keeping things organized or giving my wife a break, it's about being there. Really being present, even when I'm exhausted. But as the nights stack up, I can feel the weight of it creeping in. There are these moments when I wonder how long I can keep this up. My mind starts racing, thinking about all the ways I could be doing better, could be more on top of things. I know my wife's still recovering, and that I need to be the strong one right now. But sometimes I catch myself wondering, am I doing enough? Could I be doing more? I try not to let that self-doubt take over. But it's hard when you're running on empty. Every time I tell my wife that it's fine, that I can handle it, there's this little part of me that wonders if I'm overestimating myself. If I'm pushing myself too far. I know she worries about me, about the toll this is taking. She's always telling me to take a break, to let her handle more. But she doesn't see what I see. She just gave birth, and she needs to rest. I keep thinking that I can make it easier for her, that I can shoulder this weight, even if it means I'm running on fumes. It's this constant balancing act, trying to be the support she needs while managing my own exhaustion. I'm so focused on making sure she gets her time to recover that I'm brushing off my own need for rest. I'm not sure if that's the right call, but it feels like the only choice I have. For now, at least, I'll rest later, when things are a little more settled. At least, that's what I keep telling myself. It happened so quickly. I've been running around all morning, another night on little sleep. Another day balancing baby bottles and sippy cups and managing my toddler's endless energy. My wife had been taking it easy, just as I wanted, and I thought everything was under control. She looked tired, sure, but I figured that's just part of having a newborn. I was handling it, she was resting, and we were making it work. Or so I thought. Late that morning, just before putting our son down for a nap, I realized I hadn't even taken a bathroom break. It seemed simple enough, so I asked my wife to watch the kids for a minute. I barely even thought about it. It was one of those quick, "Hey, can you watch them while I run to the bathroom?" moments. No big deal, right? But when I came back, I found her sitting on the edge of the bed, holding our daughter in her arms, with tears streaming down her face. She wasn't just crying, she was in that state where the tears have built up over time. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and hard to reach. I felt my stomach drop, that instant wave of panic hitting me. I had no idea what had happened in the few minutes I'd been gone. But I knew something was very wrong. Without thinking, I went straight into damage control mode. What's wrong? I asked, probably more frantically than I should have. My mind was racing. Had I missed something? Done something wrong? Was it my fault? She was trying to catch her breath, wiping at her face, but the tears kept coming. She looked so vulnerable, sitting there, like she was holding onto a world of hurt I hadn't seen until now. Sorry, she managed to say, her voice shaking. I feel like I'm not doing enough. You're here every night, every morning, doing everything, and I'm barely holding it together. Her voice was so small, so unlike the strong, capable woman I'd always known. I could feel my heart breaking a little bit as she spoke. Hearing the weight of her guilt, her feelings of inadequacy, it hit me then. She wasn't just feeling tired or overwhelmed, she was feeling useless. And I hadn't even realized it. I'd been so focused on making things easier for her, on stepping up, that I hadn't stopped to think about how that might make her feel. All she saw was me taking on the heavy lifting, and somehow, in her mind, that turned into her thinking she was failing. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. How had I missed this? I thought I'd been helping, but all I'd done was make her feel like she wasn't pulling her weight. Like she wasn't good enough. I reached for her hand, trying to reassure her, to make her see how much she was already doing just by being here, by recovering. But I didn't have the words. What do you say to someone who's just brought a new life into the world and feels like they're not doing enough? She started talking again, her voice barely above a whisper. It feels like you're doing all this for me. But at what cost? You're so exhausted, and I'm just here, struggling to even get through the day. She wiped her face, looking away as if she were embarrassed by her tears. I wanted to tell her how amazing she was, how everything she was feeling was valid and real. But I just stood there, feeling completely helpless. I managed to say, "You're doing more than enough. You're recovering, and that's the most important thing." I could see the doubt in her eyes, though, as if she didn't fully believe me. She started apologizing, saying how sorry she was for having a mentee B moment. As she put it, I wanted to tell her that she had every right to feel overwhelmed. That none of this was easy for either of us. But somehow, that didn't seem like enough. I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I was the one who'd pushed her here. That my attempt to protect her had made things harder. That morning changed something. I went to bed feeling a heavy sense of guilt, wondering if I'd been going about this all wrong. I kept replaying her words in my head, her feeling like she wasn't doing enough, like my efforts somehow made her feel lesser. I realized that maybe, in my effort to be strong for her, I'd unintentionally made her feel like she wasn't strong herself. It's a strange feeling, realizing that the thing you thought was helping might actually be hurting. And that night, as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been seeing the full picture after all. That night, as I lay in bed, everything came rushing at me. My wife's tears, her words, the way she looked so small and lost holding our daughter in her arms. It all hit me harder than I'd expected. I wanted to be her rock, the steady one she could rely on. But instead, I'd somehow made her feel like she was failing. My mind wouldn't let it go. I kept replaying that moment, wondering what I'd done wrong, how I could have missed the signs that she was struggling. Was I so wrapped up in playing the strong partner that I hadn't seen what was right in front of me? I started questioning everything. Had I been overdoing it? Maybe my way of showing up, taking on the night shifts, handling everything with the kids, was too much. Maybe instead of helping her feel supported, I'd just shown her that I didn't think she could handle it. I thought I was being selfless, but maybe I was just piling on pressure without realizing it. The guilt settled in, making me wonder if I'd only been focused on what I thought she needed, rather than actually asking her. And then the self-doubt hit. If I wasn't helping her, what was I doing? Was I just taking on all these tasks because I thought it was what a good husband should do? Or was I trying to prove something to myself, that I was enough? That I could handle this without breaking? Because as much as I wanted to believe I was doing all this for her, I couldn't deny that there was a part of me that felt this need to prove I was capable of handling it all. I kept thinking about my role as a father and a husband. Here I was, trying to hold everything together, feeling like I had to be the strong one, the steady one, the dad who could balance a newborn and a toddler without flinching. But was I really helping? Or was I just putting on a show of strength that was more about me than her? I hated admitting it, but maybe I'd been so busy showing up in this way that I'd missed the point. My wife didn't need me to be a superhero. She needed me to be a partner. Someone who actually listened and saw her. It's funny how, as a dad, you can start to feel like everything you do has to measure up. Like no matter how much you do, it's never quite on par with what your partner does, especially after childbirth. I mean, she went through something life-changing, and here I was, just staying up a few nights in a row, thinking I was making some grand gesture. It hit me then that maybe I'd been trying to compensate, to make up for the fact that I could never do what she does, physically or emotionally, and by pushing myself, by trying to shoulder it all, I'd only highlighted our differences instead of celebrating what we both bring to the table. But how do you even begin to tell someone you're sorry for something you didn't realize you were doing? I wanted to go back in time, to somehow show her that all I wanted was to help her, not make her feel inadequate. The weight of it was overwhelming, but it also felt humbling. I knew now that I couldn't just bulldoze my way through parenting with sheer willpower. I had to be aware, to pay attention to what both of us needed. In the end, I realized that my attempts to be strong hadn't been about supporting her, they'd been about me, trying to prove I was enough. But as I lay there, sleep pulling at me, I started to understand that the real strength wasn't in doing everything, it was in recognizing when to let go, when to ask, when to actually listen. And I knew, if we were going to get through this together, I'd have to let go of my own ego and learn to ask her what she truly needed. That night, as I finally drifted off to sleep, I made a promise to myself. I'd start paying more attention, stop trying to take everything on my own shoulders, and start being the partner she needed me to be. It wouldn't be easy, nothing about this stage of life is, but maybe, just maybe, I'd finally found a new way forward. The next morning, I woke up with a clearer head. Though the weight of everything from the night before still lingered, I knew I couldn't keep carrying on the way I had been. Trying to be some kind of superhero. My wife didn't need that. She needed a partner, someone who recognized that this journey was something we had to navigate together. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I'd been acting out of some need to prove I could do it all, when what she needed was for me to show up in a way that made her feel supported, not overshadowed. I thought about what she must have been feeling these past few days. Here she was, fresh out of childbirth, still healing, likely exhausted in a way I couldn't fully understand. And then there was me, taking over everything like I could just fix it all if I tried hard enough. What I'd meant as support had ended up making her feel like she wasn't needed or that her role had somehow diminished. I could see how my intentions, no matter how good, had come off as overbearing. The truth was, she and I both had different strengths, different ways of showing up as parents. She had this incredible ability to read our son's moods, to know what he needed without him saying a word. She could calm our newborn daughter with just her touch, the way only a mother could. I knew that no matter how many all-nighters I pulled, I couldn't replicate what she gave to our family. And that didn't make my contributions any less valuable. It just made them different. For the first time, I saw that our roles didn't have to be equal to be important. What she brought to our family was irreplaceable. And the same went for what I offered. Parenting wasn't about keeping score, it was about filling in each other's gaps. About showing up when the other person needed it most. I realized that I'd been so busy trying to take on everything that I hadn't left space for her to do what she does best. So, I decided to start that day by taking a step back. Instead of jumping into my usual routine of handling everything, I offered to work together with her. When our son was up and wanting breakfast, I didn't take over. I asked her if she wanted to join us. Instead of swooping in to feed our daughter, I invited her to hold the baby while I got breakfast going. Little changes, sure, but they made a difference. I could see it in her eyes, in the way she started to relax, like she was finally being let back into the space that she needed to be part of. Throughout the day, I kept asking myself what it would look like to balance our roles. To let go of the idea that I needed to carry it all on my own. I could tell she was feeling more comfortable, feeling like a partner again instead of someone sidelined by my attempts to be the strong one. And the thing is, it felt good for me too. It was like a weight had lifted, like I'd finally given myself permission to stop trying to prove something. By the time evening rolled around, I could see how much more connected we felt. We weren't just two exhausted people trying to keep our heads above water, we were working as a team. And it made everything feel a little bit easier. It didn't mean I stopped helping or taking on tasks that needed doing. But it was about doing it together, checking in with her, and letting her decide when she wanted to take the lead or when she wanted to rest. It was a balance I hadn't realized we were missing. Parenthood isn't something you can do alone, even when you think you can. And that day, I learned that being a partner meant more than just shouldering the load. It meant stepping back, making space, and respecting that what she brings to our family is just as essential as what I bring. We were both in this together, and the only way forward was to recognize and honor each other's strengths. That night, as we put the kids to bed side by side, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I finally understood that being there for my family wasn't about doing it all. It was about showing up in a way that let both of us be the best parents we could be. Together, that night, after the kids were finally asleep and the house was quiet, I sat down and let myself breathe. For the first time in days, I wasn't exhausted to the point of collapse, and I could think clearly. I could feel the weight lifting, not just from my shoulders but from something deeper, like a relief I hadn't even realized I needed. All day, my wife and I had moved through the motions together, parenting side by side instead of me trying to be the one-man army. I hadn't even known how much I needed that feeling, to be part of a team instead of trying to shoulder everything on my own. I thought back to my own ideas of what being a dad meant. What it meant to show up for my family. I'd always figured being a good dad meant doing everything in my power to make things easy for them. Taking on any and every task to keep things running smoothly. But I was beginning to see that maybe I'd gotten it a little wrong. Being a good dad wasn't about doing everything. It was about being present, really present, and finding value in just being there. It was a tough lesson, realizing that my worth didn't come from what I did for my family but from just being part of it. Being in it together with them. And then, as I sat there, I thought about all the little moments that I'd overlooked while I was so busy trying to help. The tiny smile my daughter gave me when I held her. The way my son's face lit up when we played. The calmness in my wife's eyes when she didn't feel like she had to do this alone. Those moments weren't about how much I'd done or how hard I'd worked. They were just moments of love, of being there. And they meant more than any grand gesture or sleepless night. In that stillness, I realized something important. I didn't need to prove myself by doing everything. I was enough just by being present, by giving my kids and my wife my attention. My time, and my love, that was enough. I didn't need to be the strongest or the most selfless. I just needed to be there, awake to the little things, to the moments that really matter. I felt a shift in how I saw myself. I didn't need to be the dad who could do it all. I just needed to be the dad who was there. Fully, in each moment. That was the real gift I could give my family. And it wasn't something I could measure by tasks or hours of sleep. It was something deeper, something simpler. The next morning, I woke up with a different sense of purpose. Instead of throwing myself into my usual routine, I took my time. I checked in with my wife, really listened to how she was feeling, and shared what I was feeling. 2. I didn't try to take over everything. Instead, we worked together, finding that rhythm we'd been missing. And with each passing moment, I felt the pressure easing, replaced by a sense of calm I hadn't felt since we brought our daughter home. I think I'd been so focused on my role, on proving I could do it all, that I'd missed the real point. Parenthood isn't about perfection or strength, it's about presence. It's about being there, showing up day after day, even when things are messy or tough. It's about realizing that I don't have to be everything, I just have to be me. And for the first time, that felt like enough. I wasn't perfect, and neither was she, but together, we were exactly what our family needed, and that's all I could ever hope to be. The next few days felt different. There was a quiet understanding between my wife and me, a sense that we were on the same page, that we weren't just juggling responsibilities but sharing them. It was like we'd found our rhythm again, one that wasn't about dividing tasks or shouldering everything solo but about supporting each other in the little ways that made us both feel seen. We still had our moments of exhaustion, of course, that's part of having 2 young kids. But each time I felt the weight of it creeping back in, I'd catch myself and remember, I didn't have to carry it alone. And each time I saw her struggling, instead of jumping in to fix things, I'd ask her what she needed. Sometimes it was just a moment to herself. Other times it was as simple as me holding the baby while she read a book to our son. And sometimes, when neither of us knew exactly what to ask for, we'd just sit there, quietly, in each other's presence, knowing that we were in this together. One evening, after we got the kids down to sleep, I finally told her how much I appreciated her, how much strength I saw in her every day. She looked at me, surprised at first, then softened, and told me how much she'd needed to hear that. I realized I hadn't said it enough before, caught up in trying to do everything instead of just acknowledging how incredible she was. And I could see that just hearing those words made a difference. We started making a habit of it, finding small ways to remind each other of what we brought to the family. It wasn't some grand gesture, it was more of a quiet, shared commitment to supporting each other, even on the rough days. When she'd wake up for a late night feeding, I'd make sure she had a glass of water and a blanket close by. When I was up with the baby, she'd give me a quick squeeze on the shoulder before heading back to bed. Her own silent way of saying, "I see you, we're in this together." I realized then that this was the foundation we were building for our family. It wasn't about who did what or keeping score of the sleepless nights. It was about showing up in whatever way we could, even if that meant simply acknowledging each other's efforts. That was something our kids would grow up seeing, the way we supported each other, the way we loved each other through the chaos of parenting. Looking back, I understood that this journey wasn't just about figuring out how to be a dad or a husband. It was about learning to be a true partner, someone who could lean in when needed and step back to make room for her. 2. We were stronger together, and as long as we kept this perspective, I knew we could face anything that came our way. As I held our baby girl that night, rocking her softly in the quiet of our home, I felt this overwhelming gratitude. We were building something beautiful, not just a family but a partnership that our kids could look up to. One that would teach them that love isn't about doing it all or being perfect. It's about being present, being together, and supporting one another through every high and every low. This is the life we're making. And for the first time, I felt completely at peace with how imperfectly perfect it all was.